The world faces a dangerous new chapter in global security. A double hypersonic attack has shaken international headlines. Russia has struck Ukraine once again, while Yemen's Houthi forces claim responsibility for a direct strike on Israel. And as these shockwaves unfold, China parades its own military might, sending a chilling reminder of the shifting balance of power in our world. We are not just witnessing isolated conflicts. What we are seeing is the rise of a multi-fronted crisis, a testing of Western resolve, a challenge to global order, and a signal that the era of American and European dominance is under unprecedented strain. Hypersonic weapons, flying at speeds 5 times faster than sound, aren't just powerful, they are nearly impossible to intercept. Tonight, they symbolize not just destruction, but also the future of warfare. Russia's hypersonic strike on Ukraine is part of a broader campaign to overwhelm defenses and break morale. Yemen's Houthis, backed by Iran, targeted Israel at a moment of rising regional tension, and in Beijing, China's military parade displayed the world's largest arsenal of hypersonic missiles, projecting strength not only to its neighbors, but directly to Washington and London. Politically, this signals coordination, or at least timing, among nations that oppose Western policies. For Russia, every strike is a defiance of NATO. For Yemen's Houthis, each missile fired is a statement of solidarity with the broader anti-Israel bloc in the Middle East. And for China, the parade was not simply a celebration, it was a warning. We too are ready. The economic consequences are equally serious. Energy markets are already reacting with spikes in oil and gas prices. Investors fear that if these conflicts deepen, supply chains, still fragile after years of pandemic disruptions, could be further fractured. And who pays the price? Ordinary people, from London to New York to Toronto, in the form of higher fuel, food, and security costs. But here's the critical question. Are we moving toward a new Cold War or something far more dangerous? Can Western defense systems keep up with weapons that move faster than the eye can track? And perhaps most importantly, how long can global economies absorb the shocks of endless confrontation before ordinary citizens say, enough? Tonight's events are not just military headlines. They are markers of a world shifting in real time, a double hypersonic strike, a military parade, and a fragile economic order. These are the signs of an age where power is being redrawn, where alliances are tested, and where the next chapter of history is being written before our eyes. The question is, will we watch passively as the rules of the global game are rewritten, or will we engage, demand accountability, and insist on leadership that puts peace above provocation, stability above chaos, and cooperation above confrontation? History is not written by missiles. It is written by the choices nations make and by the courage of people who refuse to accept that conflict is inevitable. Thank you. A double hypersonic strike shakes global security. Russia hits Ukraine, Yemen strikes Israel, and China parades its missile power. Political impact. Moscow signals defiance against NATO, using advanced weapons to test Western resolve and weaken Ukrainian defenses. Political impact. Houthis escalate Israel tensions with Iranian backing, while China showcases hypersonics as a direct warning to Washington and London. Economic impact. Energy prices spike, investors brace for instability, and fragile supply chains face new threats. Ordinary citizens risk higher costs worldwide. Global reactions. Western leaders condemn the strikes. Allies strengthen defense discussions, while non-aligned nations weigh carefully between economic ties and security risks. These strikes and parades mark a turning point, prove the global balance of power is shifting. The world must decide, accept endless confrontation, or demand leadership for peace and stability. The world has entered uncharted territory. A double hypersonic attack has rattled global security. Russia has once again unleashed its missile arsenal on Ukraine, while Yemen's Houthi fighters claim responsibility for striking Israel. And as these shock waves unfold, China has chosen this very moment to parade its most advanced military hardware, including its hypersonic missiles, sending a calculated message to the West. This is not coincidence, this is strategy. Why does this matter? Because we are not talking about ordinary weapons. Hypersonic missiles are the future of warfare, traveling at speeds up to 5 times faster than sound, maneuverable in flight, and nearly impossible for existing defense systems to intercept. For the countries targeted, Ukraine and Israel, the strikes are devastating. But for the world watching, these events raise bigger questions. Are we entering an era where military deterrence no longer works? And if so, how safe are the nations that depend on outdated defense systems to protect their skies? Russia's strike on Ukraine is more than just another chapter in a long war. It is a signal to NATO that Moscow still holds technological and psychological superiority in certain domains. Each hypersonic launch is meant to break morale, not just in Kyiv, but in Western capitals that continue to supply weapons and funding. In parallel, Yemen's Houthi movement, backed and armed by Iran, has pushed the Middle East into greater instability by firing advanced weapons directly at Israel. This is more than regional conflict. It is a clear attempt to tie Israel into a wider front of military pressure, stretching its defense systems to the limit. Equals on the other side of the world, China is not firing missiles, but the timing of its military parade is no accident. With global attention focused on Ukraine and Israel, Beijing's show of strength was a calculated reminder that it too is in the game. The visuals of China's hypersonic arsenal rolling through the streets are not just for its own citizens. They are messages to Washington, London, and every Western capital. We are ready, we are watching, and we are not behind. Is this the beginning of a silent coordination among nations that oppose Western influence? The economic consequences are already being felt. Markets do not wait for wars to be declared. Oil prices spiked immediately after news of the dual attacks, as fears of wider instability in both Europe and the Middle East rippled across trading floors. Investors, already nervous about inflation and fragile supply chains, are asking, what happens if these conflicts spread? What happens if shipping routes in the Red Sea, Black Sea, or even the South China Sea are disrupted by war? The answer is simple: higher prices, slower growth, and ordinary families, whether in Toronto, Karachi, or London, paying the cost of global instability. So where does this leave us? The double hypersonic strikes and China's parade are not isolated events. They are signals of a world where power is being contested on multiple fronts, where old alliances are being tested, and where new technologies are shifting the balance of military strength. For decades, the West relied on missile defense systems as a shield against threats. Tonight, that shield looks increasingly fragile. The key question is, how will the international community respond? Will NATO and Western allies step up their defenses and diplomacy, or will they allow adversaries to dictate the rules of engagement? Will global leaders act to stabilize energy and supply markets, or will they let ordinary citizens bear the cost of indecision? And perhaps most importantly, will the world accept endless escalation or demand leadership that prioritizes peace over provocation? The events of today are not just about missiles. They are about messages, messages of power, defiance, and ambition, Russia, Yemen, and China are each in their own way redrawing the global chessboard. The West must now decide how to play its next move, because history is not written by weapons, it is written by choices. And the choices made in the coming weeks will shape not just the outcome of these conflicts, but the direction of our world for years to come. Russia has once again turned the global spotlight on itself, not with words, but with weapons. Its latest hypersonic strike on Ukraine is not only a battlefield tactic, it is a calculated political statement. Moscow wants the world to know that it still holds the technological edge, that its will remains unbroken, and that Western pressure has failed to bring it to its knees. This is more than war, it is messaging. Let's be clear. Hypersonic missiles are not just another tool in the Kremlin's arsenal. They represent speed, precision, and above all, unpredictability. Traveling at 5 times the speed of sound, they are designed to slip past traditional defense systems, leaving armies and governments scrambling for answers. For Ukraine, this means devastating damage and further strain on its already stretched defenses. But politically, the audience is not just Kyiv. The audience is Washington, Brussels, and London. Moscow is asking, can NATO stop us? Can your billion-dollar defense systems really protect you from the weapons of tomorrow? This is the essence of Russia's political strategy, using military might to drive wedge within Western alliances. Every hypersonic launch is a challenge to NATO unity. Some European nations, already weary of the economic toll of war, are beginning to question how long they can continue supporting Ukraine. Russia knows this. By striking hard and showcasing advanced weaponry, Moscow is betting on fatigue, division, and hesitation in Western capital. The question is, will it succeed? The political impact doesn't stop at Europe. For nations in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, many of which have remained neutral, Russia's use of cutting-edge missiles is proof that Moscow is not isolated, not weak, and not finished. In fact, it may inspire other powers to question Western dominance and seek closer ties with Russia despite sanctions. Could this be the beginning of a broader shift in global alignments, where countries hedge their bets between the West and Moscow? And then comes the economic dimension. Russia knows its strikes have ripple effects far beyond the battlefield. Each attack raises questions about stability in Eastern Europe, fueling nervousness in energy markets and unsettling investors. Oil and gas prices rise, inflation fears spread, and ordinary people from Karachi to Toronto feel the impact in their daily expenses. In this sense, Russia's missiles are not only weapons of war, they are tools of economic pressure designed to remind the world that Moscow still holds levers of influence. But here lies the critical question: how long can Russia sustain this strategy? Its economy, under heavy sanctions, is straining. Its political gamble depends on both military endurance and the patience of its people. Hypersonic strikes may demonstrate power today, but will they guarantee victory tomorrow? Or will they simply harden Western resolve, prompting NATO to accelerate its own hypersonic programs and defense systems? What we are witnessing is not just a military escalation, it is a political chess game with global consequences. Russia's hypersonic strikes are moves on a board where each piece represents alliances, resources, and credibility. For Moscow, the message is, we are still in control. For the West, the challenge is deciding whether to respond with strength, negotiation, or a mix of both. The conclusion is clear. Russia's latest strike on Ukraine is not only about territory, it is about perception. It is about proving relevance, projecting fear, and pressuring the West to rethink its strategy. Yet the danger lies in miscalculation. If Russia believes hypersonic missiles will break NATO unity, it may be mistaken. If the West believes sanctions alone will break Russia's resolve, it too may be misjudging the moment. The world stands at a crossroads. Do these hypersonic strikes signal a Russia that is desperate or a Russia that is daring? Are we looking at the last acts of a weakened power or the first stages of a new, more dangerous era of conflict? The answers are not yet written, but the consequences will shape our global future. Two very different players, Yemen's Houthi fighters and the government of China, have made bold moves on the global stage, one with missiles, the other with a military parade. And while their actions may seem worlds apart, together they form part of a larger story, a challenge to Western influence, and a reminder that power today is not just about what you fire, but also what you show. Let's start in the Middle East. The Houthis, a movement rooted in Yemen's civil war and heavily backed by Iran, claim responsibility for a hypersonic strike against Israel. This is not simply another rocket fired from a militia group. This is a direct escalation at a time when the region is already under strain. For Israel, it means defending its skies on multiple fronts against Hamas, Hezbollah, and now the Houthis. For Iran, it is a chance to demonstrate that its allies are capable of hitting Israel where it hurts. But for the rest of the world, it raises a critical question. How many fronts can Israel handle, and how many fires can the Middle East absorb before it becomes a regional war? The political impact of this strike goes beyond Israel's borders. By launching advanced weapons, the Houthis are sending a message, not just of resistance, but of reach. They want the world to know they are no longer just a local militia. They are part of a broader axis of power stretching from Tehran to Beirut. Each strike chips away at the sense of security that Israel has worked so hard to build, and each launch forces the United States and its allies to rethink their defense commitments in the region. Is the Middle East sliding toward a new era where non-state actors, armed with state-level weapons, can change the balance of power? Now shift the focus eastward to Beijing. On the same day these strikes shook Israel, China rolled out its military might in a grand parade. Hypersonic missiles, long-range drones, and advanced fighter jets, all showcased before the world's cameras. This was not an internal celebration. This was a performance with a global audience. China wanted the West to see, and more importantly, to believe, that it is now a peer competitor, not a distant challenger. The timing could not be more deliberate. As Russia and its allies escalate through direct strikes, China positions itself as the quiet giant, showing strength without firing a shot. The political message is unmistakable. China is not just focused on its regional disputes in the South China Sea or Taiwan Strait. It is signaling its place as a global power, one capable of reshaping alliances, rewriting rules, and challenging the very structure of the international system. For Washington and London, this is more than a show, it is a warning. And for countries caught in between, from Africa to South Asia, it raises tough choices. Do they align with the West or hedge their bets with Beijing's rising influence? The economic dimension is equally significant. Every strike from Yemen, every parade in Beijing rattles global markets. Energy traders see risk in the Middle East, while investors see long-term shifts in supply chains if China flexes too aggressively. Ordinary citizens feel this in rising fuel prices, in inflation that refuses to ease, and in the creeping cost of uncertainty. These are not just political games. They are pressures that ripple from high diplomacy into household budgets. So, What does it all mean? The Houthis, by striking Israel, are pushing the Middle East closer to a wider confrontation. China, by parading hypersonics, is pushing the world closer to a new balance of power. Together, they highlight a dangerous truth. The monopoly of Western influence is eroding, and new centers of power are emerging. The question is, can the West adapt to this multipolar reality, or will it cling to an old order that no longer exists? Yemen's missiles and China's parade are not isolated events. They are signals of ambition, of defiance, and of a world that no longer moves to the rhythm of one superpower. The danger lies in miscalculation, one strike too many, one show of strength too bold, and the world could find itself stumbling into conflict on multiple fronts. The challenge for global leaders is to recognize the pattern before it's too late. Because in today's world, power is not just about who has the most missiles, it's about who controls the narrative of the future. Wars are not only fought on battlefields, they are also fought in boardrooms, markets, and households. And tonight, as Russia strikes Ukraine, Yemen targets Israel, and China parades its military power, the economic consequences are spreading across the globe. These events may feel distant, but their impact is already showing up in energy prices, supply chains, and the cost of living for millions of people. The battlefield is not just in Kiev or Tel Aviv, it is in every grocery store, every fuel station, and every household budget. Let's start with energy. Within hours of the double hypersonic strikes, global oil prices jumped. Why? Because traders and investors fear instability in two of the world's most sensitive regions, Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Ukraine is a crucial transit hub for energy supplies into Europe, while Yemen's location near the Red Sea and Bab el-Mandeb Strait makes it a flashpoint for global shipping lanes. When those routes look threatened, markets react instantly. The result? Rising oil and gas costs that trickle down into everything: transportation, electricity, and even food production. How much longer can global economies absorb these shocks before the strain becomes unbearable? The impact doesn't stop with oil. Supply chains, already fragile after years of pandemic disruptions, are once again under pressure. The Houthis have targeted shipping before, and even the perception of risk in maritime routes can reroute vessels, delay cargo, and drive up costs. Add to this the uncertainty caused by Russia's ongoing war and China's display of strength, and you have a recipe for hesitation in global trade. Companies delay investments, exporters hesitate to ship, and consumers face higher prices. Inflation, which many hoped was cooling, could once again gain momentum. And who feels this most? Not governments, not corporations, but ordinary families trying to balance their monthly budgets. The political layer is equally important. Russia knows its strikes do more than damage Ukraine. They spook investors in Europe and force Western governments to spend more on energy subsidies and defense spending. The Houthis and Iran understand that every missile launched at Israel adds risk premiums to oil markets, creating pressure on US and European policymakers, and China, by showcasing its military strength, is signaling that any confrontation involving Beijing would carry not only military but also economic consequences. In this sense, hypersonic weapons are not just tools of destruction, they are instruments of economic leverage. So what does this mean for global markets? Central banks already battling inflation now face new uncertainty. Do they raise interest rates further to cool rising prices, or risk letting inflation spiral by holding back? Investors, seeing instability in energy and defense, may flock to safer assets like gold and US bonds, creating volatility across currencies. For developing nations, higher borrowing costs could trigger debt crises. For ordinary citizens, it means higher mortgage rates, pricier fuel, and fewer opportunities. Is the world prepared for the possibility of a prolonged economic war running alongside military conflict? And then comes the larger question, who benefits? Defense industries in the West are already seeing surging demand for anti-missile systems, drones, and advanced weaponry. Oil-producing states profit from rising prices. Meanwhile, fragile economies, whether in South Asia, Africa, or Latin America, struggle under the weight of costlier imports and weaker currencies. The divide between winners and losers is widening. Are we entering a future where conflict is not only about territory, but also about who can profit economically from instability? The conclusion is stark. The double hypersonic strikes and Chinese military parade are not just military headlines, they are economic tremors shaking the foundations of global markets. The longer these crises continue, the more ordinary people will pay the price in higher bills, in lost jobs, and in uncertain futures. The challenge for global leaders is clear. Can they act decisively to stabilize markets, secure supply chains, and protect vulnerable economies? Or will they allow geopolitical rivalries to drag the world into a prolonged cycle of both military and economic warfare? Because in the end, this is not only about who controls the skies, it is about who controls the future of global prosperity. The choices made in the coming weeks will not just shape wars, they will shape wallets, livelihoods, and the stability of nations worldwide. When missiles are launched and parades of military power take place, the shockwaves are not confined to the battlefield, they ripple across the entire world. Tonight, the global response to Russia's strike on Ukraine, Yemen's strike on Israel, and China's parade of hypersonics is revealing just how divided, uncertain, and fragile international politics has become. Some nations condemn, some hesitate, and some quietly calculate how to turn crisis into opportunity. Let's begin with the West. The United States, the United Kingdom, and NATO allies were quick to condemn Russia's latest hypersonic strike, reaffirming their support for Ukraine. Statements from Washington and Brussels emphasized the need for unity against aggression and hinted at further arms packages for Kiev. Israel, too, has received public assurances of support, with Washington vowing to bolster missile defense cooperation. Yet behind the words lies a pressing question. How much more can Western nations commit politically and financially before their own people begin to push back? The cost of endless conflict is already showing in higher energy bills and defense spending, and patience at home is not infinite. In the Middle East, the reactions are mixed. Saudi Arabia and Gulf allies, weary of Iran's hand in the Houthi strike, are condemning the escalation, but stopping short of direct involvement. Iran, meanwhile, is quietly celebrating the Houthis' ability to rattle Israel's defenses, seeing it as proof that its regional network of allies is growing stronger. The broader Arab world is split. Some governments see the Houthis as destabilizers, while others quietly welcome any blow that weakens Israel. The region is once again caught between condemnation and calculation. Could these divisions fuel a wider regional conflict, or will cooler heads seek dialogue before the fire spreads? Paul Yamat. Asia's reaction is equally telling. Japan and South Korea, already alarmed by North Korea's missile programs, see China's hypersonic parade as a direct threat to their security. They have called for closer military cooperation with Washington, while also accelerating their own defense modernization. India, however, walks a careful line. With deep ties to Russia, a complex relationship with China, and growing ties to the West, New Delhi has chosen neutrality, calling for de-escalation but avoiding blame. This balancing act reflects a wider truth. Many nations are not picking sides. They are waiting to see which way the wind blows. And then there is Africa and Latin America. Many countries here have remained relatively quiet, issuing cautious statements about peace, but avoiding outright condemnation of Russia, Yemen, or China. Why? Because they see opportunity. For nations struggling with debt, inflation, and weak currencies, Russia and China offer trade, energy, and investment without political strings. Aligning too closely with the West risks losing those ties. This is the reality of a multipolar world. Neutrality is not weakness, it is strategy. But how long can neutrality last in a world where crises are multiplying? Economically, the global response is already shaping markets. Western sanctions against Russia are being discussed, but enforcement is becoming harder as more countries refuse to participate. Israel is expected to accelerate weapons purchases, boosting the U.S. defense industry. China's parade, meanwhile, has rattled investor confidence as markets factor in the risk of future confrontations in the Pacific. The response is not just diplomatic, it is financial, and it will shape where money, trade, and power flow in the years ahead. So, what is the big picture? The reactions to these events show us a world that is no longer united under one order. The West rallies behind Ukraine and Israel, but many nations in the global South are choosing silence, hedging, or quiet alignment with Russia and China. Global institutions like the United Nations issue statements, but without real enforcement power. They sound more symbolic than decisive. What emerges is a fractured international community, one where every crisis reveals more cracks in the foundation of global cooperation. The conclusion is sobering. The double hypersonic strikes and China's military parade have not only tested military defenses, they have tested global unity. And the results are mixed. Some nations are standing firm, others are standing back, and many are standing in the middle. The danger is that this divided response may embolden aggressors, convincing them that the world lacks the will to push back decisively. The question now is simple. Will the international community find the courage to act collectively, or will it continue to fracture under pressure? Because in the end, the strength of global peace is not measured by missiles launched, but by the unity of nations willing to prevent the next one. Tonight's events leave us with a sobering realization. We are no longer living in a world of isolated conflicts. A double hypersonic strike, Russia against Ukraine, Yemen against Israel, paired with China's dramatic display of military might, marks something far bigger. It marks a turning point. Power is shifting, alliances are hardening, and the global order that has defined much of the past 70 years is under direct challenge. Think about it. Hypersonic weapons, once the stuff of science fiction, are now being used in real wars. They travel faster than sound, dodge traditional defenses, and change the rules of security overnight. Russia fires them to test NATO's resolve. The Houthis use them to stretch Israel's defenses. And China parades them to remind the world that it too belongs at the top table of global power. These aren't signs of a new age of warfare and geopolitics. So the question is, are we prepared for it? The political dimension could not be clearer. Russia wants to break Western unity. Yemen, backed by Iran, wants to show Israel that no front is safe. And China wants to project confidence without firing a single shot. Together, they are challenging not just nations, but systems of power. For decades, the West believed its alliances, its institutions, and its military superiority guaranteed stability. But tonight, those assumptions are being tested. Can NATO remain united under mounting pressure? Can Israel withstand threats on multiple fronts? Can the United States lead in a world where rivals are no longer intimidated? And then comes the economic reality. Every strike, every parade, every confrontation ripples through the markets. Oil prices spike, shipping routes grow uncertain, inflation fears resurface. For people in New York, London, Toronto, or Karachi, this isn't abstract geopolitics. It's higher food bills, pricier fuel, and uncertain jobs. Leaders may argue about strategy in conference rooms, but the impact is already felt at kitchen tables around the world. The question is, how long will ordinary citizens tolerate the costs of global rivalry before demanding a different path? What we are witnessing is the emergence of a multipolar world. The United States and its allies still hold vast power, but they are no longer uncontested. Russia, Iran, China, and their partners are pushing back, each in their own way. The danger is not simply confrontation, it is miscalculation. One strike too far, one sanction too harsh, one military exercise misinterpreted, and the world could stumble into a conflict that no one can control. History teaches us that great powers rarely shift without turbulence. The challenge is whether this time humanity can learn from its past. So, where does this leave us? Tonight's events demand reflection. Do we continue down a path of escalation where every strike triggers a counterstrike and every parade provokes a new arms race? Or do we demand something different? Leadership that seeks stability, diplomacy that values compromise, and policies that protect ordinary people rather than endanger them, because in the end, history is not written by missiles. It is written by choices, choices made by leaders, choices demanded by citizens, choices that decide whether the next generation inherits a world at war or a world at peace. The takeaway is simple but urgent. The double hypersonic strike and China's parade are not just stories of the day. They are warnings of the future, a future where speed, power, and rivalry define international relations, unless we insist on a different path. The world is watching, and the world is waiting. The question is, will its leaders rise to the moment or let history repeat itself?